Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a no-nonsense Texas rancher refuses to let a shiny new HOA turn his private pond into a community lake, all hell breaks loose. What starts as a polite request spirals into a full-blown war, legal battles, federal agents, and one man standing his ground against suburban madness. I've lived on this land my entire life. 180 acres of stubborn, sun-baked Texas dirt. A few barns with good bones, a natural spring-fed pond the size of a small lake, and the same creaky two-story farmhouse that my granddad raised hogs and hell in back when Hoover was president. I'm not a nostalgic man, but I don't take kindly to people who look at my land like it's theirs to shape or share, which brings us to the morning that woman with the yoga posture and real estate smile walked up to my fence like she owned the place. It was a Thursday. I remember because the windmill had just jammed again, and I was cursing at it when I saw her. Blonde bob, sunglasses like satellite dishes, a fleece vest zipped up too high for a Texas spring, and a damn tablet clutched to her chest like a gospel book. She was marching up the gravel easement like she had a court order in her pocket. I didn't recognize her, but I knew the type before she opened her mouth. "Good morning. Are you the property caretaker?" she asked, like I was the hired help. "No, ma'am," I said, wiping grease on my jeans. "I'm the one who owns the property. Name's Sam." Her expression didn't change. She thrust out a perfectly manicured hand. "Karen Childers. I'm president of the Silver Timber Ranches Homeowners Association." I looked down at her hand, then at the tablet she was hugging, like it had nuclear launch codes. I shook her hand anyway. My mama didn't raise me to be rude to strangers unless they earned it. "Silver Timber Ranches," I said. "That the new development to the east?" She nodded brightly. "Just opened last fall. It's a planned conservation-style community for families looking to escape the chaos of the city. We're very focused on shared green space, community recreation, and preserving the pastoral character of the landscape." I nodded toward her expensive hiking boots, currently caked in my red clay. "Well, you found pastoral all right." She didn't laugh. "Actually," she continued, tapping her tablet, "we're currently assessing local natural resources, and your pond falls within the visual corridor of our western walking trail. A lot of our residents have been asking about access, since it really feels like a community lake. We were hoping you'd be willing to discuss removing the perimeter fence and granting guest access on weekends." I blinked. "You want me to let HOA folks use my private pond?" "Yes," she said, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. "Just for low-impact activities, kayaking, birdwatching, maybe light swimming." I let that hang in the air for a beat. That's a hard no." Karen smiled, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Perhaps you didn't understand. It's very common in conservation communities to integrate natural features, especially water sources, into shared use agreements. I'd be happy to provide our drafted access proposal. We even have a model liability waiver." "Ma'am," I interrupted, "this pond was dug out by my great-grandfather in 1928. It's fed by two natural streams that fall under my registered water rights, confirmed by the state of Texas and the Bureau of Land Management. That fence you see is legal. The no trespassing signs are legal, and nobody swims in that pond unless I say so." Which I don't. She looked like someone had just slapped her with a live catfish. "That's disappointing." "Yeah, well, that's life," I said. Karen's lips twitched into a tight smile. "I see. Well, I'll relay your perspective to our board. We prefer to resolve things cooperatively. But just so you're aware, your fencing does cross the unofficial easement line that many locals believe is part of the old grazing trail. There's a history here." I laughed. "History don't mean squat without documentation, and I've got enough paperwork to bury a lawyer. Have a good day, Mrs. Childers." She didn't reply. Just turned on her heel and marched back up the trail, dust kicking off her boots like a warning shot. I figured that was the end of it. Just another bored HOA president with too much free time and too many pamphlets. But deep down, I had a hunch. That woman wasn't walking away. She was circling. It didn't take long for the paper war to start. About a week after my run-in with Karen, I found a letter in my mailbox that stuck out like a sore thumb. White, embossed, and too formal for anything good. The envelope had the HOA's logo on it, all swirly trees and faux rustic elegance. Inside was a neatly folded letter on heavy stock paper that probably cost more than most folks' monthly water bill. The heading read, Notice of Violation and Environmental Impact Concern. I leaned against my truck as I read. The letter stated, in a tone that tried real hard to sound polite, that my fencing around the pond was visually disruptive to the Silver Timber Ranch's nature corridor, and that I had been blocking access to a communal natural resource. It went on to suggest that the pond was historically unregulated and thus may be considered an ecological landmark subject to community oversight. Then it listed recommended corrective actions, including the removal of the perimeter fence, installation of a shared-use footpath, and attendance at the upcoming HOA board meeting to collaboratively explore easement integration. I read the whole thing twice, then laughed so hard I almost dropped my coffee. They weren't just bold, they were bureaucratic. That same day, I scanned the letter and emailed it to my attorney, Sarah Jenkins, a no-nonsense property rights lawyer who had once made a judge cry in open court. She called me 10 minutes later. "Sam," she said, "this is absolute nonsense." "Thought so. I'm drafting a formal cease and desist. You'll want to post it at the trailhead entrance, too. These people are fishing, pun intended, for legal gray areas hoping you won't bite back." I grinned. They're poking the wrong bear. The next few days were quiet until Sunday morning when I spotted two men and a woman walking along the inside edge of my southern fence line, clipboard in hand. They wore matching tan vests with little Silver Timber HOA patches stitched over the breast pocket. Real official looking. One of them held up a phone and appeared to be recording. I walked over calmly, shotgun cradled in the crook of my arm, not loaded, just persuasive. "You folks need something." The clipboard guy turned, startled. "Oh, we're conducting an environmental audit of the shared corridor space adjacent to community boundaries." "You're on my land," I said flatly. "Well, the trail path is mapped as semi-public access per our Greenway initiative." "Your initiative isn't law," I said, motioning toward the no trespassing sign bolted to a post 6 feet from where they stood. "And that sign's been there since before you folks knew which county you were moving to." The woman piped up, clipboard shaking slightly. "We're not trying to cause trouble, Mr. Ratliff. It's just that the HOA is concerned about wildlife passage, and the pond appears to be a key migration point for several native bird species." I stepped forward. "The only thing migrating is your nonsense back across my property line. Turn around." Now, they left, muttering and shooting nervous glances back at me. That evening, I received a second letter, this one much longer and even more self-important. It cited obscure passages from local zoning documents, made references to unclaimed runoff rights, and included a blurry map that someone had clearly doctored to make the HOA boundary lap over into the corner of my property like a drunk dog marking territory. I didn't bother laughing this time. Instead, I dug into my files. I've got a cabinet in the back room, metal, fireproof, older than me. Inside are deeds, water rights, BLM certificates, USDA grants, and maps stamped by more federal agencies than Karen probably knew existed. I laid them out on my dining table like I was preparing for war. Because I was. I made copies of everything. I sent another package to Sarah. I wrote a letter of my own, clear, factual, and stacked with citations, and sent it via certified mail to the HOA board. I ended it with the line, "Any further intrusion or unauthorized communication will be treated as harassment," and referred directly to the county sheriff and my legal counsel. I figured that might shut them up. I figured wrong. It was 7:15 on a Tuesday morning when I heard the knocking. Not the polite kind either. The heavy rhythmic pounding that says, "We've got a badge and paperwork." I was halfway through my first cup of coffee, boots still off, when I opened the front door and found two deputies standing on my porch, hands resting on their belts. Behind them was a black and white cruiser parked awkwardly across my gravel path, wheels half in the grass. One of them, the older of the two, nodded. "Morning. You Sam Ratliff?" "I am," I said, gripping the doorknob tight enough to make it creak. "What's this about?" The younger one glanced at his clipboard, then looked me square in the eye. "We received a formal complaint from the Silver Timber Ranch's Homeowners Association regarding alleged unlawful occupation of land and waterway usage." I blinked. "Come again?" The older one shifted uncomfortably. "They're claiming that you're occupying a tract of land and a pond that have been reclassified by the HOA as a community access natural resource. They say you've refused to cooperate with official community oversight." I let out a bitter chuckle. That's the dumbest thing I've heard this year, and I've been to a cattle auction in Amarillo. Neither deputy laughed. The younger one continued. They've submitted a document stating that the area is now under shared jurisdiction based on community utility precedent and are asking for a temporary vacate order while the county reviews the case. I stared at them. Both. You're telling me some suburban paper pushers redrew my property lines on Microsoft Paint, and now you're here to ask me to leave my own damn house? We're not forcing anything right now, the older deputy said quickly. We're here to inform, not to evict, but we do need to see documentation that confirms your ownership and water rights. Yeah, I said, stepping back inside. Give me 1 minute. I didn't just come back with papers. I came back with a goddamn arsenal. Deeds signed by my grandfather and notarized in 1942. A federal land patent from the Bureau of Land Management issued in 1968. State-verified water use rights. A USDA program inclusion letter. And a laminated topographical map with clear parcel boundaries, one of which cut a nice bold line between my pond and their precious trail system. I laid the folder out on the porch railing like I was showing off a royal flush. The older deputy took a long time flipping through the stack. His partner stepped off the porch and called someone, likely their superior. A low conversation followed, full of phrases like verified coordinates, not part of the HOA charter, and my personal favorite, not enforceable by civil entity. 15 minutes later, the call ended. The young one returned, face tighter than when he'd arrived. We appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Ratliff, he said stiffly. It appears there's no legal standing for their claims. We'll be filing a report noting that you have clear title and control over the property in question. I folded my arms. Glad to hear it. Now, I'd appreciate it if the next time someone makes up fantasy laws about my land, you knock a little quieter. We'll make a note of that, the older one said with a tired smile. Sorry for the trouble. You might want to consider installing additional signage near the pond access, just to avoid confusion. I nodded. Already done. The kind that glows in the dark. They left without another word, tires spinning a little as they turned back down my drive. I stood there a minute longer, just watching the dust settle. And, sure enough, not 30 seconds later, a white SUV rounded the bend on the HOA trailhead and slowed to a stop at the edge of my property. Karen, she didn't get out, just sat behind the wheel, sunglasses on, watching. I raised my coffee cup in her direction and walked back inside. That night, a message appeared in the local HOA Facebook group. Someone sent me the screenshot anonymously. Karen had written, "Unfortunately, local enforcement is unwilling to act on community claims at this time. Mr. Ratliff has chosen confrontation over cooperation. We will continue to explore alternate options for ensuring public access to natural features historically enjoyed by this area. The pond is for all of us." Apparently, she didn't take rejection well. It started with tire tracks. Early Wednesday morning, I noticed them, fresh grooves in the clay near the southern fence line. Not from my truck, and not from anyone with a sense of respect. I followed them a few yards, boots crunching over the damp earth, until I saw where they stopped, right by the pond. The tall grass had been flattened. Someone had dragged something heavy down to the water, something with wheels. That something turned out to be a kayak. Bright orange, still dripping on the bank like it had been abandoned in a hurry. Next to it sat a crushed six-pack box, empty chip bags, and a lawn chair folded neatly under a tree like it was just another public park. And just past the reeds, I saw two teenage boys in life vests paddling around the pond like they were on vacation. I didn't shout. I didn't storm down there. I went back to the house, checked my cameras, and sure enough, the footage from midnight showed a small group slipping through the tree line with headlamps and coolers. No hesitation, no guilt, like they'd done it before. At 9 a.m., I drove into town and filed an incident report at the sheriff's office. The desk deputy, a young guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, listened as I laid it out. Well, he said slowly, technically without a clearly posted perimeter and documented instances of prior disputes, it's hard to treat this as criminal trespass, especially if the HOA is claiming historical community use. You might want to go through civil court. I stared at him. Let me get this straight. Because I didn't line the pond with landmines and razor wire, it's now a free-for-all? He raised his hands. Not saying it's right, just saying it's tricky. By noon, things had escalated. 7 cars were parked along the narrow dirt easement. People were setting up like it was a 4th of July picnic. Blankets, umbrellas, a Bluetooth speaker blasting country pop, a folding table with a charcuterie board, a toddler in water wings running toward the pond. I couldn't make this stuff up. I confronted a guy who was dragging a 2-man canoe out of his pickup bed. Bald, mid-40s, smug smile. "Mind telling me what you're doing?" I asked. He didn't even flinch. "Oh, Karen said it's fine. We're just using the community lake. She cleared it." "Community lake?" I said, incredulous. "You're standing on private property. This pond isn't in your HOA." He pulled out his phone and started scrolling. "Pretty sure it is. She posted a map last week in the HOA group. Said this whole area used to be public grazing land. Legacy usage or something." "That's Facebook law," I snapped. "Try that in court." He shrugged and kept unloading. I called the sheriff again. This time, Deputy Taylor, older, more reasonable, came out personally. He walked the property with me, listened, looked at the camera footage I'd saved, nodded a lot. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Thing is, Sam, unless they break something or refuse to leave when you ask them directly, it's all still in that gray area. And if they're genuinely misinformed—" "They're not misinformed," I said. "They're entitled." "That's different." He nodded sympathetically. "Then you're going to need to take this higher." So I did. That night, I installed 4 new cameras, 2 facing the pond, 1 at the old trail access point, and 1 hidden in the brush near the creek. I posted new signs in 3 languages. I contacted my old supervisor at the USDA and sent him a report with time-stamped images and legal background. And then I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Marcy Ruiz from the Bureau of Land Management. Back when I was working water engineering contracts, we'd handled easement disputes and runoff violations all across the state. Marcy knew the law, and more importantly, she knew how to bring hell in a folder. She answered on the first ring. "Sam Ratliff," she said. "That you stirring up dust again?" "Not yet," I said, "but I'm real close." By Friday morning, the pond looked like a battlefield that had been dressed up for a family reunion. Someone had left behind a portable grill, half a cooler full of warm soda, and a blue pool noodle floating near the edge like a sad chlorinated flag. The teenage boys were back, now with a GoPro strapped to their heads, doing cannonballs off a half-rotted tree stump that I damn well knew wasn't safe. A woman in yoga pants had pitched a tent near my west fence line and was practicing Tai Chi like she owned the sunrise. One man was walking around with a fishing rod and a Hawaiian shirt, giving strangers tips on bait techniques. None of them looked like they were confused. They looked like they'd been invited. I wasn't going to wait for another deputy to show up and tell me that my pond was in a legal gray area because some HOA Karen had printed a map with crayons. It was time to get serious. By noon, I was on a video call with Marcy Ruiz from the BLM. She remembered me, remembered my work with watershed boundaries, and more importantly, remembered how HOA boards could sometimes smell like lawsuits in the making. "Let me guess," she said, leaning back in her office chair. "They redrew imaginary boundaries and decided your pond was theirs for aesthetic purposes." "Dead on," I said. "Send me everything," she replied. "Title deeds, parcel maps, GPS coordinates, and photos. If they're trespassing and misrepresenting jurisdiction over federal recognized land, this gets elevated fast." I didn't waste time. I sent a thumb drive by overnight courier with copies of my federal land grant file signed by the Department of the Interior, all communications from the HOA and Karen, security footage showing multiple trespass events, evidence of environmental disruption around the pond, erosion near the banks, crushed vegetation, garbage, and noise pollution. By Monday, I got a call from someone higher up, Field Agent Thomas Baird, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He was terse, professional, and laser-focused. Said he'd seen the photos of the soft-shell turtle nest that had been trampled near the pond's inlet. "This area's a designated habitat corridor," he said. "Any unauthorized activity here could be considered a federal wildlife disturbance. We're dispatching a team." Tuesday afternoon, I stood on my porch and watched 3 government SUVs roll up the drive like they meant business. Agents in plain khakis, hats, and clipboards poured out like termites with subpoenas. They walked the pond, took soil samples, photographed damage, interviewed me for 45 minutes while another team reviewed the security footage. That evening, they came back to the house with their report in hand. "You have clear federal water rights, Mr. Ratliff," said Agent Baird, "and this property is well outside HOA jurisdiction. We've also documented several violations of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and the Endangered Species Act from unpermitted recreational use of this water body." I nodded. "Glad someone's finally seeing it." He looked grim. "It's not just Karen anymore. The HOA board voted last week to officially include the pond in their community recreation zone in their updated charter. That document was submitted to the county without informing the registrar that the area in question isn't theirs." I let out a low whistle. "So they forged it." "Legally, it's looking that way." "Good," I said. "About time someone brought the hammer down." He handed me a copy of their field report, thick with federal letterhead. "We're referring this to the district attorney, and we'll be coordinating with your lawyer. In the meantime, we recommend you do not engage with any individuals attempting to use the pond. Let us build the case." I smiled, tired but satisfied. "Then I'll sit on my porch with coffee and a camera." Before he left, Baird turned back and added, "And Mr. Ratliff, the soft-shell turtles are federally protected. That means anyone damaging that nest could be facing more than just trespassing charges. They could be looking at jail time. Guess it's about to get real unpopular to bring a kayak to my pond." By Thursday morning, things had changed. Not in the way Karen expected, I'm sure. The pond, once a makeshift HOA playground, now had orange federal boundary markers, 2 laminated notices from the Fish and Wildlife Service stapled to cedar posts, and 3 newly installed "No Trespassing, Federal Violation" video monitored signs gleaming under the Texas sun. Each was planted like a miniature war banner. I even set up motion-activated sirens along the trailhead. Subtle? Number but subtlety hadn't worked. The response was swift and completely unhinged. By mid-morning, a pack of HOA residents had gathered on the edge of the trail overlooking the pond. Lawn chairs, binoculars. One man had a drone hovering overhead, probably streaming footage back to their little HOA Facebook group. I spotted Karen standing center front in a coral blouse, arms crossed, performing for her audience like a suburban general preparing for a water war. She shouted across the field like it was a courtroom. "This is overreach. You can't claim natural water as private. That's environmental greed." I stepped out onto the porch and held up the laminated federal report for everyone to see. She screamed, "That pond was used for decades by this community." I shouted back, "Your HOA has existed for 14 months. More shouting followed. Someone called me a government snitch. Another guy, Chad, I think his name was, HOA board member and full-time personal injury lawyer, tried to yell about water table legislation. I reminded him that he failed the bar twice. Then Karen stepped forward and announced loud enough for the cameras, "We do not recognize this so-called federal interference. We will continue using the pond as part of our community's historical recreation rights, starting now." And with that, she waved her arm like a Roman emperor and sent in the first wave. 2 teenagers with inner tubes and 1 guy dragging a cooler. I didn't move. I just pointed to the motion detector near the fence post. It clicked. A loud mechanical beep rang out. The drone shifted position. Seconds later, a black SUV rolled up the drive. It wasn't mine. Out stepped Agent Baird, flanked by 2 more federal officers, clipboard in hand, expressions sharp. Karen froze. "Ma'am," said Baird, "we informed you in writing that use of this land without authorization constitutes a violation of Title 16 of the U.S. Code. You are in breach of a federal order." "I have rights," she barked, stepping forward. "No, ma'am," Baird replied calmly. "You have a lawsuit." Within 10 minutes, the agents had taken names, issued 4 citations, and instructed Karen and her companions to leave immediately or face formal charges. The HOA crowd dispersed like ants under a magnifying glass. Karen, red-faced and muttering, was the last to leave. Later that afternoon, a federal vehicle returned with a small portable station, a mobile enforcement unit, Baird called it. The pond had officially become a federally monitored site pending investigation, and it was about to become a legal sinkhole for the entire HOA. But Karen wasn't done yet. That night, I received an envelope in my mailbox. No stamp, just hand-delivered spite. Inside was a printed copy of an emergency HOA declaration signed by Karen and 4 board members, declaring that Silver Timber Ranch's HOA will continue its peaceful protest by encouraging civil use of shared natural space in defiance of unlawful, Privatization attached was a list of acceptable protest activities: kayaking, meditation, children's swimming lessons, and, I kid you not, sunset wine gatherings. I laughed for 5 solid minutes. Then I forwarded the whole thing to Baird and my lawyer, because if they wanted a war, they were finally getting one. By the time the sun rose on Saturday, it wasn't just about a pond anymore. It had turned into something bigger, an HOA insurrection masquerading as a wellness retreat. I knew Karen was petty. I knew she was stubborn, but I hadn't anticipated just how far she'd go once she realized she was losing. I woke up to the sound of chanting, not coyotes, not cows, not songbirds, chanting. Low, nasal humming in sync with clinking wind chimes and what I could only describe as the sad rhythm of a steel drum played by someone who definitely didn't know how to play it. I threw on a flannel and stepped onto the porch with my coffee in hand, expecting maybe 1 or 2 brave fools ignoring the no trespassing signs. What I saw instead nearly made me choke. There were tents, 8 of them arranged in a half-moon shape near the southeast bank of the pond. A handmade wooden sign had been staked into the ground. Sacred Waters Community Reflection Zone. Respect, not repression. There were dream catchers hanging from pine branches. An elderly woman in a tie-dye poncho was leading a guided meditation on reclaiming natural spaces from patriarchal enclosure. Someone was burning sage over the old fire pit. A kid was playing with a plastic sword in a circle drawn with chalk around a turtle nest. I blinked slowly and said out loud to no one, "She's turned it into a cult." Just past the tree line, I spotted Karen, wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and speaking into a megaphone while a shirtless man with a clipboard followed her around like an intern. She was broadcasting something about sovereign HOA rights and ancestral communal use, while a woman in yoga pants handed out what looked like flavored cucumber water to the newcomers. I recorded the whole thing. Then I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Agent Baird, who picked up and said, before I even got a word in, "We've already seen the drone footage. We're sending enforcement." The second was to my lawyer, who muttered something about class action escalation and bad faith organized trespass, then said he'd be driving down Monday with a full legal team. The third was to the Texas Department of Agriculture's Rural Protection Division. Why? Because I'd remembered something very important. My pond was technically listed under my Conservation Water Grant program. That made it not just private land, but regulated agricultural infrastructure, which meant any interference. Federal and state violation, and they took that stuff seriously, very seriously. While I waited, I checked the new trail cams I'd set up the day before. What I saw was beyond absurd. A man with a harmonica standing waist-deep in the pond, playing music for the fish. A woman setting up a massage table on the gravel bank. A small whiteboard sign that read, HOA Reading Hour, 3 p.m., Walden by Thoreau. By early afternoon, the government showed up again. But this time, it wasn't just Agent Baird and his clipboard. This time, it was 3 federal vehicles, a state environmental officer, and a rural enforcement marshal. They moved with calm, practiced authority, walking past the chanting yoga moms and staring down Karen like they'd read this script 100 times before. "Ma'am," one of the marshals said, stepping in front of her megaphone, "you've been formally warned. You are now in violation of federal wildlife protection, agricultural obstruction statutes, and have trespassed on designated conservation land. I have a court-issued temporary enforcement order. You are to vacate immediately." Karen looked like she might spit. "We are peacefully assembled." "You are illegally assembled," he corrected. "Freedom of association." "This is not public land," the officer said coldly. "This is private, registered, federally documented property under USDA protection. And you've placed a minor near an endangered turtle nest." Karen tried to argue, but by then the officers were already dispersing the crowd. They didn't shout. They didn't pull weapons. They just documented. Clipboards, body cams, a portable printer. I watched as they issued citation after citation: trespass, unauthorized disturbance, environmental interference, child endangerment, even unauthorized burning of plant matter during fire season. They shut it down. Tents came down. People scattered. The steel drum player tried to argue that he was offering a public service. The marshal handed him a ticket. Karen, red-faced and furious, stood next to her golf cart turned mobile protest hub and sputtered, "This is a witch hunt." "You made it easy," Baird replied. They seized her megaphone. But the real twist came just as the last car rolled off my land. One of the federal officers turned to me and said, "By the way, We found forged documentation in the HOA's county charter submission. They filed a map that misrepresented your property lines by almost 200 feet. That's a felony. I blinked. Karen forged my boundaries? Looks like it. And she submitted that to the registrar. He nodded. We're referring it to the state attorney general's office. You'll want to prepare for testimony. I just stood there for a moment, letting that sink in. It wasn't just trespass anymore. It was forgery, document tampering, intent to defraud. Karen had taken this HOA fantasy and wandered so far into delusion she might have just bought herself a felony record. That night, I sat on the porch with a bourbon in hand, watching the security feed on my laptop. Quiet, clean, still. But I knew it wasn't over yet. Karen wasn't the type to surrender. She was the type to make one last desperate move, and I was ready. It didn't take long for the charges to hit. On Tuesday morning, 2 unmarked sedans pulled up to Silver Timber Ranches. This time, they weren't here to talk. Karen was served on her own driveway by a state marshal and a county investigator. According to my attorney, who was now running point alongside federal contacts, the charges ranged from document forgery and unlawful interference in land registry filings to willful obstruction of federally protected agricultural land. The list went on for 2 pages. She tried to record the whole thing on her phone. But after 30 seconds of incoherent ranting about natural access rights, the marshal calmly informed her that any further social media activity discussing an active investigation could be used as evidence of intent. That shut her up. I watched the footage on my trail cam with a bowl of popcorn. It wasn't satisfying in the way you imagine revenge should be. It wasn't explosive, dramatic, or loud. It was quiet, efficient. The law didn't need to shout. The next 48 hours were a flurry of movement. The HOA's board resigned. First the treasurer, then the secretary, then a man named Doug, whose only listed responsibility was community drone oversight. The HOA's official website went dark. Then came the press. Local outlets got wind of the story after someone leaked the federal filings. The headline on the Texas Hill Dispatch was brutal. HOA president accused of land grab faces felony forgery. I didn't leak it, but I didn't deny it either. 2 days later, I got a formal letter from the state agricultural board. They were expanding my conservation status, granting me an enhanced perimeter designation due to consistent threats to ecological boundaries. It meant stricter protections, more funding, and, ironically, a bigger budget for fencing. And then came the civil suit. My lawyer filed it like he was swatting a fly. Damages for trespassing, destruction of habitat, interruption of agricultural cycles, defamation, legal fees, and emotional distress. Though we both chuckled at that one, Karen tried to respond through a half-baked GoFundMe campaign titled Protect Our Pond Rights, but it barely raised $600, mostly from a yoga instructor and a man named Chip. Her attorney withdrew within a week. By the time we got to court, the outcome was already a formality. The judge, a middle-aged woman with the look of someone who'd been through one too many HOA hearings in her life, didn't even let Karen finish her statement. She cut her off with a dry, "Ma'am, the United States Department of the Interior, 2 federal agencies, and the state of Texas disagree with you. So, unless you have a new constitutional argument I haven't heard, sit down. Verdict: full recognition of my land boundaries and private ownership of the pond. HOA found guilty of collective negligence. Karen found personally liable for document falsification, public endangerment, and malicious defamation. Silver Timber Ranches HOA ordered to dissolve within 30 days. Liquidation of communal assets to pay restitution total compensation $2.1 million. It wasn't about the money. Hell, I used half of it to restore the shoreline and rebuild the barn my grandfather raised cattle in. But it was nice knowing their clubhouse furniture helped pay for my new solar irrigation system. Karen, she got 9 years. Maybe 5 if she behaves. I doubt she will. The woman once argued with a game warden about the migratory habits of ducks. The HOA signs came down a week later. The streets lost their ridiculous colonial names. No more Silver Sage Lane or Whispering Fox Circle. Most of the residents quietly moved out. Some apologized. A few brought baked goods. One guy brought a bottle of wine and asked how to get his land rezoned. I let him sit on my porch and watch the pond for a while. He said he hadn't realized how peaceful it was when it wasn't full of Karens with clipboards. A month after the trial, I was invited to speak at a regional landowners summit. They asked me to talk about the importance of standing your ground. I told them about the pond, about the fence, about the drone that now serves as a scarecrow for HOA intruders. And I told them this: you don't just own the land, you protect it. You remember who walked it before you. You fight for it when no one else will. Because when someone tries to turn your home into a timeshare brochure, you don't negotiate. You rebuild the damn fence and weld the gate shut. Now, when I sit by the water, I don't see invaders. I see trees, reflection, and quiet. And on that new fence, right above the turtle nest, there's a sign, big, red, and custom-made. Private property trespassing will not be tolerated. HOA, never again.